My children thought my grief had made me weak. They saw a confused old man, a house too big for one person, and a bank account they could drain for their own futures. They were about to learn that my wife, Eleanor, had prepared me for this day. Her final lesson was about to begin. This is the story of how I took back my life. Stick around to see how it all unfolds. The coffee in my hands had gone cold. I hadn't noticed. I was staring at the steam rising from the dark blue ceramic, watching it thin out and vanish into the quiet air of the kitchen. Lily, my granddaughter, had given me this mug for Father's Day years ago. It had an uneven rim where her small hands had shaped it in a pottery class, and it had always felt perfect. A solid, warm anchor in the mornings. Now it just felt heavy. An artifact from a life that belonged to someone else. It had been 2 weeks since we buried Eleanor. 14 days. The world had decided that was a respectable amount of time to grieve before it started making demands again. The house felt alien. The familiar creak of the floorboards in the hall sounded like a stranger's footsteps. My own reflection in the hallway mirror was a man I barely recognized, his shoulders slumped, his eyes hollowed out. Even my voice sounded foreign when I answered the phone. A flat, tired monotone that seemed to come from a great distance. The phone rang, its shrill cry cutting through the silence. I knew who it was before I looked. Jacob, my son. I let it ring 3 times before I picked up, just to pretend I had been doing something else. Something other than just sitting here. Dad, his voice was clipped, impatient, the same tone he used when a meeting was running long. I'm here. Jacob. Listen, Jessica and I have been thinking. That house is it's too much for one person. The upkeep. The empty rooms. It's a lot. I looked out the window at the garden. Eleanor's garden. I'm managing. A sigh came through the receiver, heavy with condescension. We know you think you are, Dad, but we have to be practical. There's a lot of value locked up in that place. Value that's just sitting there. Value. That's what our home had become. Not a repository of 50 years of memories. Of scraped knees and birthday parties and quiet Sunday mornings. But an asset. A line item on a balance sheet. I said nothing. My silence was a void he was eager to fill. I've already spoken to a realtor. He continued, his voice picking up speed. A friend of a friend. He says, the market in your area is on fire. We could get a great price. Set you up in a nice manageable condo. Something modern. Secure. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing. He wasn't asking. He was informing me of a decision that had already been made in a conversation I wasn't a part of. There's no mortgage. Jacob, I said, my voice as level as I could make it. We paid it off 6 years ago. There was a pause, a flicker of surprise. Maybe. Or just recalculation. Well, that's even better. He said, his tone shifting into a higher gear of false enthusiasm. That's pure equity. Dad, think about it. We'll talk more later. I've got to jump on a call. He hung up. I placed the phone back in its cradle, the plastic cool against my fingers. I didn't move for a long time. Pure equity. That's what I was sitting on. That's what my life's work with Eleanor had been reduced to. I pushed myself up from the table and walked out the back door into the garden. The air was cool, smelling of damp earth and the sharp, piney scent of the rosemary bush that had grown wild over the flagstone path. Eleanor had loved that rosemary. She'd run her hands through it every time she walked past, carrying the scent with her into the house. I could almost see her there, kneeling by the rose bushes, her sun hat casting a shadow over her face. Every plant, every stone, was a monument to her. The lemon tree in the corner, its branches heavy with fruit that needed picking. The patch of mint she used for her iced tea, the crooked bird bath we'd bought at a flea market on our 25th anniversary. I was the caretaker of a museum of our life, and my children wanted to sell it for the price of the bricks and land. I was trimming a dead leaf from a geranium when the phone rang again. This time, I knew it would be Jessica. They worked as a team. Jacob was the battering ram. She was the sweet poison that seeped into the cracks he made. Daddy, her voice was syrupy, dripping with a concern that felt manufactured. How are you holding up? I was just so worried about you. All alone in that big place. I'm fine. Jessica, I was just in the garden. Oh, that's nice, she said, as if I'd told her I was engaging in a quaint, harmless hobby. Listen, honey, I had a wonderful idea. You know our basement, it's all finished now. We could turn it into a beautiful little apartment for you. It has its own entrance. A full bathroom. You'd have your privacy. But we'd be right upstairs if you needed anything. We could take care of you? The image flashed in my mind. Me, living in their basement, hearing their lives through the ceiling. A dependent. A burden they had graciously agreed to house. That's a generous offer. I managed to say, of course, we just want to know you're safe. And honestly, it would help us out. Too, she added, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You know, with Lily's tuition for NYU being just astronomical, selling the house would take so much pressure off of everyone. There it was, the emotional blackmail, delivered with a smile. My granddaughter, Lily, the one pure and uncomplicated love in my life, was now a bargaining chip. They were leveraging my love for her to get what they wanted. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was a chilling clarity. I saw the whole equation laid out before me. I wasn't a father to be cared for. I was a problem to be solved. My grief was an inconvenience. My home was a bank. My life was a set of logistical hurdles standing between them and their financial comfort. I murmured something non-committal and ended the call. I stood there, in the middle of Eleanor's garden, and felt the full weight of their betrayal settle over me. They weren't just disrespecting my grief, they were trying to erase the life that had produced it. I thought back to a quiet evening 6 years ago. Eleanor and I were at the kitchen table, the same one I was sitting at this morning. We had the final mortgage statement in front of us. I remembered the look on her face, a mixture of pride and relief. As I signed the last check, she'd put her hand over mine. We did it. Colton, she'd whispered. It's all ours. No one can ever take this from us. We never told the kids, not because it was a secret, but because it was ours, a quiet victory in a long life of shared victories and struggles, and now, that private triumph had become my only shield. They were operating on the assumption that I was trapped, that the financial burden of the house would force my hand. They had no idea. The house suddenly felt too large, not because of the empty rooms, but because of the suffocating presence of my children's intentions. I couldn't stay in the kitchen. I couldn't be in the garden. I walked down the hall and stopped in front of a closed door. Eleanor's office. I hadn't been inside since she passed. It felt like trespassing on sacred ground. My hand hesitated on the brass doorknob, but I needed a place to breathe where the air wasn't thick with their demands. I turned the knob and pushed the door open. Everything was exactly as she had left it. Her reading glasses sat on top of a stack of books. A shawl was draped over the back of her chair. The room smelled of old paper and the faint, vanilla-laced scent of her perfume. It was a time capsule of the woman I loved. My eyes scanned the organized clutter of her desk, the pen holder filled with meticulously sharpened pencils, the neat piles of correspondence, the small, framed photo of a much younger me and her on our wedding day. And then I saw it. Sitting squarely in the center of her leather desk blotter, impossible to miss. It was a simple, light blue file folder. It was unmarked, except for a single line of her elegant, familiar script written across the front. It wasn't a label. It was a message addressed to me. It said, "Colton, if you're reading this, it means you need to know what's inside." My heart gave a painful thud against my ribs. A wave of cold washed over me. The kind that has nothing to do with the temperature of the room. With a hand that trembled slightly, I reached out and opened the fold. My fingers trembled as I lifted the first document from the light blue folder. It was the deed to our house. The original. Crisp paper, bearing both my name and Eleanor's. Underneath it was a stamp, bold and red, that read, "Paid in full." It was concrete proof of the secret victory we had shared at our kitchen table 6 years ago. Beneath the deed was a stack of bank statements for an account I had never seen before. It was a savings account, also in both our names. But the statements had been sent to a P.O. box. The balance made my breath catch in my throat. It was a substantial sum, far more than I would have thought possible. Eleanor, my practical, frugal Eleanor, had been quietly building a fortress for us all these years. And then I found the last document, the one that made no sense at all. It was another deed, printed on heavy paper with official-looking seals. But the language was Portuguese. I could make out a few words, Algarve. Vila, and Eleanor's full name, listed as the sole proprietor. My wife, it seemed, owned a villa in Portugal. Tucked in the very center of this pile of secrets was a single, folded piece of stationery, her favorite. The one with the embossed gardenias. It was a letter, written in her familiar, elegant hand. I unfolded it, and it was as if her voice filled the silent room. My dearest Colton, if you are reading this, my love, then my worst fear has come to pass. And you are facing the world without me. I am so sorry. I hope my absence has been peaceful. But I know our children, I know you, and I know that your grief, your goodness, can be mistaken for weakness. I love Jacob and Jessica with all my heart, but I was never blind to their nature. They are not cruel, not truly, but they are practical to the point of being ruthless. They see life as a series of problems to be solved, two of assets to be managed. They will see you, alone in our big, beautiful house, and they will see a problem. They will try to solve you. They will tell you that you cannot manage on your own. They will try to convince you that you are a burden, cloaking their words in the language of concern. They will make plans for you, for your life, for the home we built together. They will do it because they believe they are right, and they will not listen to what you truly want. My love, do not let them make you small. Our life was big. Your future must be too. I had to stop reading. A thick, painful lump had formed in my throat. She had seen it all. She had known them, and me, so perfectly. I took a deep, shuddering breath and continued. The documents in this folder are your tools. Our home is yours. free and clear. The bank account is your independence. And the villa is your escape hatch. It is a place where no one will try to solve you. A place where you can simply be. Her name is Sophia. She is the caretaker. Her number is on the back of this letter. She is a good woman. She will help you with everything. She is expecting that one day you might call. This is not a betrayal of our children. Colton, it is an act of preservation for you. You have earned the right to live out your days in peace, on your own terms, surrounded by sun and the smell of the sea, not in a basement apartment, listening to the footsteps of people who think they know what's best for you. You gave them their lives. Do not let them take yours. Live for both of us now. Be happy. All my love. Forever. Eleanor. I folded the letter and held it to my chest. The grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight. But now it was mixed with something else, a profound, aching gratitude. She hadn't just left me memories, she had left me a blueprint, a future. She was still taking care of me. A strange calm settled over me. The fear and confusion that had been my constant companions for 2 weeks began to recede, replaced by a quiet, cold resolve. I knew what I had to do. The next morning, the phone rang as I was finishing my coffee. It was Jacob. "Dad, I just wanted to follow up," he said, skipping any pleasantries. "The realtor, his name is Bill. He can stop by this Friday at 2 p.m. to do a preliminary walkthrough." I told him that would be fine. The sheer arrogance of it was breathtaking. He hadn't just suggested it, he had arranged it. He had invited a stranger to come into my home to assess its value for a sale I had never agreed to. That was the final push I needed. The last flicker of doubt was extinguished. "That won't be necessary." "Jacob," I said. My voice was different now. It was calm, but there was a new edge to it. A firmness he had not heard in a very long time. "What do you mean, Dad? This guy is the best in the area. We need to move on this." "No," I said simply. "Bill will not be coming on Friday. This house is not for sale." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Dad, are you feeling okay? You're not thinking clearly." "On the contrary, Jacob, for the first time in 2 weeks, I am thinking with perfect clarity. Do not call the realtor again. I will handle it." I hung up before he could respond. My hand was steady as I placed the receiver down. I looked at the blue folder sitting on the counter. My tools. It was time to use them. I found the number for Mr. Davies, our family lawyer for over 30 years. A man who had helped us with our wills and had known Eleanor since she was a young woman. "Colton," he said, his voice warm with sympathy. "It's good to hear from you, though I wish it were under better circumstances. How are you holding up?" "I'm getting by." "Peter," I said, "listen, I need your help. It's about the house, and it's about Jacob and Jessica." I explained everything. The phone calls, the pressure, the realtor. Then I told him about the blue folder. When I finished, there was a long pause on his end. I heard him let out a low whistle. "That Eleanor," he finally said, a note of pure admiration in his voice. She was always 10 steps ahead of everyone else. A brilliant woman. He cleared his throat. "Colton, to be clear, you are on unshakable legal ground. The house is yours. Your children have absolutely no claim and no right to force a sale. None." "I know," I said. "What I need you to do is make sure they know I want you to draft a formal letter, a cease and desist. Send it to both of them. And to the realtor Jacob contacted. I want it made explicitly clear that any further attempts to contact me about selling my property will be considered harassment. Consider it done. Mr. Davies said. His voice, all business now. I'll have it drafted this afternoon and sent by courier tomorrow morning. They should receive it by the end of the day. Thank you, Peter. A weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying lifted from my shoulders. It was done. The first step had been taken. That afternoon, I felt a strange new energy. The house no longer felt like a prison of memories, but like a fortress. My fortress. I found myself drawn to the attic. A place I hadn't been in years. It was dusty and filled with the ghosts of forgotten things. But I was on a mission. I found what I was looking for in the far corner, several large cardboard boxes, labeled in my own handwriting from years ago. Jacob, childhood. Jessica, memorabilia. I pulled them into the light. I opened Jacob's first. The smell of old paper and dust filled the air. Inside was a collection of a life I barely remembered. His first baseball glove. The leather stiff and cracked. A box of Lego bricks. A stack of report cards tied with a faded ribbon. Trophies from soccer tournaments. Their gold paint peeling. I opened Jessica's box next. Her favorite doll. A Raggedy Ann with yarn hair and one button eye missing. A collection of ballet slippers. A diary with a tiny broken lock. A shoebox full of concert ticket stubs and dried corsages from high school dances. I looked at these relics. These pieces of the children they used to be. A pang of sadness hit me. Sharp and unexpected. Where had these children gone? When did they become the cold? Calculating adults who saw their grieving father as a financial problem. I didn't have an answer. But I knew I couldn't keep these things anymore. They weren't my memories to hold on to ever. They belonged to a past that felt disconnected from the present. A story whose ending had been rewritten. Methodically, I sealed the boxes with fresh packing tape. I carried them downstairs, one by one, and placed them by the front door. It was a cleansing, a declaration. I was packing up the past and making room for my own future. I had just sealed the last box, the tape making a loud tearing sound in the quiet house. When the doorbell rang, the sudden chime made me jump. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked to the door and peered through the peephole. My blood ran cold. It was Jacob's silver BMW, parked in my driveway. Both he and Jessica were standing on my front porch, their faces set and grim. They had come unannounced. The confrontation I had been preparing for, the one I thought I would have days to brace for, was here. Now, for a long moment, I just stood there, the sound of the doorbell echoing in the sudden, tomb-like silence of the house. My heart, which had felt so calm and resolute just moments before, was now a frantic drum against my ribs. They were here. The abstract battle I had been planning in the quiet of my mind had just materialized on my doorstep. Loud and impatient, I took a slow, deep breath. The air tasting of dust and old paper from the boxes, I could feel Eleanor's presence in the room. A silent, steadying force. This was not just my fight, it was ours. I walked to the door, my footsteps unnaturally loud on the hardwood floor. I turned the deadbolt, the sound a heavy, metallic thunk that seemed to seal the moment, and pulled the door open. There they stood, Jacob and Jessica, framed by the afternoon light. Jacob had his arms crossed over his chest. Probably a posture of belligerent authority he'd probably perfected in a boardroom. Jessica stood slightly behind him, her face arranged into an expression of deep, sorrowful concern. A mask she wore so often, I wondered if she remembered her own face beneath it. Their eyes went past me, into the hallway. They saw the boxes, 4 of them, stacked neatly, with their names written on the side in thick black marker. Jessica's mask of concern faltered, replaced by a flicker of genuine confusion. "What is all this?" she asked, her voice a little too sharp. It wasn't a question born of curiosity, but of accusation. "Dad, what are you doing? Are you throwing us out?" The absurdity of the question, that I could be throwing them out of my house, was almost laughable. "No," I said, my voice quiet. "These are your things. From the attic. I thought you might want them." I stepped back, holding the door open wider. It was an invitation, but it was also a challenge. They exchanged a quick, uncertain glance before stepping inside, their confidence visibly shaken by this unexpected scene. They moved like strangers in a house they had grown up in, their eyes darting around as if looking for other signs of my supposed instability. "Close the door, please," I said. Jacob did, and the sound of it clicking shut seemed to trap the 3 of us in a bubble of thick, uncomfortable tension. "Dad, we need to talk," Jacob began, regaining his footing. "My call this morning, you didn't sound like yourself. We were worried. We came to make sure you were okay." "I'm fine," I said. "I was just about to make some tea. Would you like some?" The offer of such a mundane, domestic ritual threw them off balance again. This wasn't the script they had prepared for. They expected a grieving confused old man they could corner and overwhelm. They didn't expect a host. "Tea," Jacob repeated, as if the word were foreign. "Yes, I find it calming." I turned and walked toward the kitchen without waiting for an answer. I could feel their presence behind me. A heavy, uncertain weight. I filled the kettle at the sink, the sound of the rushing water abnormally loud. I moved with a deliberate slowness, each action measured. I took 3 mugs down from the cupboard, my familiar blue one, and 2 plain white ones for them. I placed tea bags in each. The small, familiar actions were an anchor in the swirling storm of their presence. My hands were perfectly steady. They followed me into the kitchen and stood awkwardly by the island, watching me as if I were a museum piece that might suddenly crumble. "Dad." About the realtor, Jacob started again, unable to tolerate the silence. "We can talk after the tea is ready," I said, not looking at him. I lit the gas stove. The whoosh of the flame, a satisfying sound. The silence that followed was different. It was no longer just an absence of noise. It was a living thing. A palpable pressure in the room. I was in control of it. I let it stretch, letting them stew in their own discomfort. They had come here to ambush me, to force their will upon me in my own home. They did not realize that they were the ones who had walked into a trap. The kettle began to whistle. A high, piercing shriek that cut through the tension. I poured the steaming water into the 3 mugs, the fragrant steam of Earl Grey filling the air. I carried the mugs to the kitchen table and set them down. "Please, sit," I said. They sat, their movements stiff and reluctant. I took my seat in the chair at the head of the table. Eleanor's chair, the one I had avoided for 2 weeks. Today, it felt right. I wrapped my hands around my warm mug, It felt like holding a small piece of the sun. I looked at them. I really looked at them. For the first time, my son. His face lined with stress and ambition. My daughter. Her eyes already welling up with the strategic tears she could summon at will. I felt a deep, profound wave of sorrow wash over me. Not for myself, but for them, for the love that had been so corrupted by entitlement and greed. You came here because you were worried. I began, my voice still quiet. But now it filled the room. You think I'm not thinking clearly. You think this house is too much for me. You think you know what's best. We're just trying to help. Daddy, Jessica said, her voice trembling on cue. We love you. We don't want to see you struggle. Your help? I said, meeting her gaze. Involves inviting strangers into my home without my permission and making decisions about my life as if it were a corporate merger. That isn't help. Jessica, that is a hostile takeover. The business term, so familiar to Jacob, made him flinch. Now, that's not fair. He blustered. We're your children. We have a right to be concerned. We have a stake in this. A stake in what? Exactly, I asked. In my well-being, or in the equity of this property? The directness of the question struck him silent. I took a sip of my tea. It was hot, and it burned a pleasant trail down to my stomach. I set the mug down with a soft click. Let me make this simple. So, there are no more misunderstandings. The house will not be sold. Jessica let out a small, theatrical gasp. It is my home. I continued, my eyes fixed on Jacob. It is where I built a life with your mother. It is where I intend to live out the rest of my days. This is not a negotiation. You can't afford it, Jacob burst out, his frustration boiling over. The taxes, the insurance, the upkeep. You're on a fixed income. You're not being realistic. Dad, you're being sentimental and it's going to bankrupt you. I let his words hang in the air for a moment. I looked at his flushed, angry face and felt nothing but a distant pity. He was so certain of his facts, so confident in the cage he had built for me. There is no mortgage. Jacob, I said, my voice dropping even lower, making him lean in to hear. Your mother and I paid this house off 6 years ago. It's ours. Free and clear. The silence that followed was absolute. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. I watched the color drain from Jessica's face. I saw a muscle begin to twitch in Jacob's jaw. A tiny, frantic spasm he couldn't control. This was a variable they had never once considered. Their entire plan, their every calculation, had been built on a foundation of false assumptions. Jacob was the first to recover, his shock quickly curdling into rage. That's impossible, you're lying, why would you never tell us that? Because it was none of your business, I said calmly. It was a private matter between my wife and me. So you've just been sitting on all this money, he demanded, his voice rising. While we've been struggling, while Jessica has been worried sick about paying for Lily's college, how could you be so selfish? And there it was, the final, ugly truth of their hearts. My prudence was selfishness. My independence was a betrayal. Jessica, seeing her brother's anger, was getting them nowhere. Switched tactics. The tears that had been shimmering in her eyes now began to fall freely. Daddy, how can you be so cold? She sobbed, her voice thick with manufactured pain. This is what Mom would have wanted. She would have wanted us to be a family, to be secure. She would have wanted you to let us help you. You're dishonoring her memory by pushing us away like this. The mention of her mother, the weaponization of Eleanor's memory, was the one thing that could still pierce my armor. A hot, white flash of anger surged through me. But I thought of Eleanor's letter, of her calm, wise words. Do not let them make you small. I pushed the anger down, compressing it into a cold, hard diamond of resolve. I let Jessica's sobs subside into small, pitiful hiccups before I spoke again. You will not speak of what your mother would have wanted, I said, and the ice in my voice made them both freeze. You have no idea what she wanted. But I do. Because she told me. I paused, letting the weight of that statement sink in. You mentioned Lily's tuition. It's a heavy burden. I know. A flicker of hope appeared in Jessica's tear-filled eyes. She thought she had found a crack, a way back in. Your mother was worried about that, too, I continued, my voice softening slightly, luring them in. She always worried about Lily's future, which is why, years ago, she set up an educational trust fund for her. I watched their faces as I delivered the final, fatal blow. It's more than enough to cover all 4 years at NYU. And then some. Eleanor made me the sole trustee. I will be managing the funds and paying the university directly. So you see, you don't have to worry about that anymore. Your mother took care of it. It was a checkmate. I had not only removed their primary justification, but had also revealed that their mother, the woman whose memory they were trying to use against me, had foreseen their nature and had actively planned around them. She had protected her granddaughter not just for them, but from them. They were utterly defeated. The anger, the tears, the arguments, it all evaporated, leaving behind 2 stunned, hollowed-out adults. They looked like children who had just been told that magic wasn't real. I stood up from the table. The movement was a dismissal. The conversation is over. I said, those boxes in the hall contain your childhoods. I suggest you take them with you when you leave. I walked over to the counter and picked up the blue folder. I held it up for them to see. Your mother was a brilliant, thoughtful woman. She prepared for everything, including this. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving them sitting in the wreckage of their own greed. I went down the hall and stood by the front door, waiting. A few moments later, they emerged from the kitchen, their faces pale and blank. They didn't look at me. Silently, they each picked up their boxes and walked out the door, leaving it open behind them. I watched them load the past into the trunk of their expensive car. I watched them drive away down the street we had lived on for 50 years. The street where they had learned to ride their bikes and played hide and seek. They didn't look back. I closed the door, and for the first time, I turned the deadbolt from the inside. The solid clunk of the lock sliding into place was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. The house was quiet. It was mine. The air felt lighter, cleaner. The battle was over. I walked back to Eleanor's office, the blue folder in my hand. I sat down in her chair, the worn leather cool against my back. The room no longer felt like a shrine to the past. It felt like a command center for the future. I opened my laptop, the screen casting a soft glow in the dimming afternoon light. The website for the airline loaded quickly. My fingers moved surely over the keyboard. I typed in the departure city. I typed in the destination, Faro, Portugal. I selected a date for next week. I clicked one way, Avard. I pulled out the bank card for the account Eleanor had left me. As I typed in the numbers to purchase the ticket, a profound sense of peace settled over me. This wasn't an act of anger or revenge. It was an act of liberation. An act of love. Honoring the final gift my wife had given me. The confirmation screen appeared. My ticket was booked. It was real. Just as a slow, genuine smile began to form on my face for the first time in weeks. My phone buzzed on the desk beside me. I glanced at the screen. It was a text message. From Lily. My heart skipped a beat. I picked up the phone and read her words. Grandpa, Mom and Dad just got home. They look really weird, angry, and sad at the same time. They won't talk to me. Is everything okay? I stared at the small, glowing screen, at Lily's words floating in the digital darkness of my wife's quiet office. Is everything okay? The simple, innocent question was a world away from the complex, ugly emotions that had just transpired within these walls. My first instinct was to protect her, to build a wall around her heart, just as I had built one around my own. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard, clumsy and slow. What could I possibly say? How could I explain that the family she knew had just fractured? That the ground beneath her feet had irrevocably shifted? I couldn't. Not like this. I typed a reply. My words chosen with the care of a man disarming a bomb. Everything is fine. My dear, just some grown-up business. Your parents and I had a long overdue talk. I love you very much. Let's speak on the phone in a few days. I hit send. It felt inadequate. A flimsy bandage on a deep wound. But it was the best I could do. I had drawn my battle lines. And the first casualty was always the truth. I had to shield her from the shrapnel of my war. The week that followed was one of the strangest of my life. I lived like a ghost in my own home. A place that was suddenly both intimately familiar and completely alien. Every object, every room, was saturated with 50 years of living. And I moved through it all, with the detached reverence of a visitor in a museum that was about to be closed for good. I packed a single large suitcase, choosing items not for their monetary value, but for their weight in memories. A faded photograph of Eleanor and me on our honeymoon, squinting in the bright Italian sun. The thick wool sweater she had knitted for me one Christmas, which still smelled faintly of her. A small, smooth stone we had picked up on a beach in Maine. I spent hours in the garden, my hands in the soil, saying a silent goodbye to each rose bush, to the unruly rosemary, to the lemon tree that stood as a silent, fruitful witness to our life. I was not just leaving a house, I was leaving the physical manifestation of my heart. The pain of it was a dull constantage, a counterpoint to the sharp, bright hope of the future Eleanor had given me. I didn't receive any calls from Jacob or Jessica. The silence from their end was as loud and final as the closing of a vault door. Mr. Davies called once to confirm that his letters had been received and that the realtor had formally withdrawn his interest. The legal walls were secure. On the morning of my departure, I walked through the empty rooms one last time. The house was clean, quiet, and waiting. It wasn't waiting for a new family. I realized it was waiting for me to leave, so it could finally rest, filled only with the echoes of the love it had held for so long. I placed my key on the kitchen counter, next to the blue mug Lily had made for me. I couldn't take it with me. It belonged here. With a final look at Eleanor's garden through the window, I walked out the front door and did not look back. The flight was a disorienting blur of anonymous airports and the low drone of engines. I was suspended between two worlds. A man without a country. A man without a home. But as the plane began its descent into Faro, and I saw the rugged, sun-baked coastline of the Algarve appear through the clouds, A feeling I hadn't experienced in a very long time began to stir within me. It was a fragile, tentative thing, like the first green shoot of spring pushing through frozen earth. It was hope. Stepping off the plane was like stepping into a different world. The air wasn't just warm, it was alive. It was thick with the smell of salt from the sea, the sweet perfume of unseen flowers, and something else. Something wild and earthy. The light was different, too, a brilliant, golden light that seemed to make everything sharper, more vibrant. It was a world away from the muted, gray light of the life I had left behind. I saw her almost immediately, standing just beyond the customs gate. A woman in her late 60s, with kind, crinkled eyes and a cascade of silver hair tied back in a colorful scarf. She held a small, handwritten sign that simply said, "Colton." This had to be Sophia. As I approached, a warm, genuine smile spread across her face. "Mr. Colton," she said, her English accented with the soft, melodic cadence of Portuguese. "Welcome. I am Sophia. Please, call me Colton." "Colton," she repeated, testing the name. She didn't offer to shake my hand. Instead, she stepped forward and wrapped me in a gentle, motherly hug. It was brief, but it was filled with a surprising strength and an unspoken understanding. It was the first truly comforting human touch I had felt since I had lost Eleanor. "Eleanor told me so much about you," she said, pulling back, her eyes shining. She said you had the kindest eyes she had ever seen. She was right. The simple, direct compliment, spoken with such sincerity, nearly broke me. I could only nod, my throat too tight to speak. The drive to the villa was a sensory feast. We wound our way through narrow cobbled streets, and then out onto coastal roads that hugged the cliffs. With the vast, glittering expanse of the Atlantic Ocean stretching out to the horizon, Sophia pointed out landmarks, her voice a soothing narrative to the passing scenery. She spoke of Eleanor not in the past tense, but as if she were a dear friend who had just stepped out for a moment. She told me how Eleanor had bought the villa a decade ago, how she would visit for a few weeks every year to recharge her soul, and how she had meticulously prepared it for my eventual arrival. Finally, we turned down a small, gravel lane, and there it was. The villa was not large or grand. It was simple, humble, and perfect. The walls were a brilliant whitewash, dazzling in the afternoon sun, and the doors and shutters were painted a deep, calming shade of sea blue. A small garden, wilder and more rugged than Eleanor's at home, was bursting with bougainvillea, hibiscus, and the sharp, clean scent of lemon trees. "Welcome home, Colton," Sophia said softly. She led me inside. The interior was cool and filled with a soft, diffused light. The furniture was simple, made of dark, sturdy wood. The floors were cool terracotta tiles. On the kitchen table, a basket sat waiting for me. Inside was a loaf of crusty bread, a wedge of local cheese, a bottle of olive oil, and a bottle of red wine. A simple, perfect meal. Eleanor left instructions. Sophia explained. She said, after a long journey, "A man needs bread and wine, not fuss." After Sophia showed me the rest of the house, she prepared to leave. "I will be back in the morning to take you to the market," she said. "For now, rest, eat. The house knows you are here. It will take care of you." I stood at the door and watched her drive away. And then, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I was truly, completely alone. But this was not the crushing, hollow loneliness of my old house. This was a peaceful, liberating solitude. The silence here was not an absence of life. It was filled with the gentle hum of it, the distant murmur of the waves, the chirping of crickets, the rustle of leaves in the sea breeze. That night, I slept in a bed with clean, crisp sheets that smelled of sunshine and lavender. I didn't dream. I simply fell into a deep, black, dreamless sleep. A sleep so profound it was like a healing balm on my bruised and battered soul. When I awoke, the room was filled with the soft, rosy light of dawn. I lay there for a long time, watching the light change, feeling the knots of tension that had been lodged in my shoulders and my back for months begin to slowly, finally, unwind. The days that followed melted into a gentle, healing routine. I learned to live again, not as a husband, not as a father, but simply as a man. I learned the simple joy of walking to the village in the morning to buy fresh bread. I learned to make coffee in the small Nation of Brevers, stovetop pot, and drink it on the sun-drenched terrace, watching the fishing boats make their way out to sea. I learned the names of the men who played cards in the village square. And though we shared few words, we shared nods and smiles that spoke a universal language of quiet companionship. I began to work in the small garden, my hands finding a familiar comfort in the soil. I pruned the lemon trees, pulled the weeds, and watered the vibrant flowers. I was not trying to replicate Eleanor's garden. I was simply tending to this new one, nurturing its life as it, in turn, was nurturing mine. One afternoon, about a month after I had arrived, I was sitting on the terrace, reading a book. When I knew it was time, I took out my phone and dialed Lily's number. She answered on the second ring. Grandpa. Her voice was a mixture of relief and worry. "Hello, my dear," I said, my own voice sounding stronger, clearer than it had in years. I told her everything. I told her the truth, gently, without anger or bitterness. I told her about her parents' plans, about the blue folder, about her grandmother's incredible foresight and love. I told her where I was, and why. I spoke for a long time, and she listened. Her silence on the other end of the line, a testament to her maturity and grace. When I finished, there was a long pause. I could hear her take a shaky breath. "I'm not surprised, Grandpa," she finally whispered, and the sadness in her voice broke my heart. I knew something was wrong. They've been like ghosts. I'm so sorry." "You have nothing to be sorry for, Lily," I said firmly. "This was never about you. You are the best part of all of us." Can I come visit you?" she asked, her voice small, hopeful. "I want to see you. I want to see Grandma's secret house." A smile spread across my face. A real, deep smile that reached my eyes. I would love that more than anything in the world. 2 months later, she arrived. Watching her walk through the arrivals gate at the Faro airport, her face breaking into a radiant smile when she saw me, was like watching the sun rise after a long night. We hugged for a long time, a silent affirmation of the bond that had survived the wreckage of our family. Her week with me was a gift. We didn't do much. We walked on the beach, collecting seashells. We explored the narrow, winding streets of the nearby towns. I taught her how to cook a simple fish stew I had learned from Sophia. We sat on the terrace in the evenings, talking for hours. About her future. About my past. About everything and nothing. She brought a youthful, vibrant life back into my world. And in her eyes, I saw not a frail old man, but her grandfather, strong and whole. On her last evening, I gave her something I had found in Eleanor's desk at the villa, a small, leather-bound journal. Your grandmother wrote in this when she was here. I told her, I think she would want you to have it. We sat together on the terrace as the sun began to set, casting long, golden shadows across the garden. Lily opened the journal to a page marked with a faded ribbon. She began to read aloud, her voice soft in the quiet evening air. To my dearest granddaughter, if you are reading this, she read, her voice catching slightly. I want you to know a secret. The world will try to tell you that love is about holding on, about never letting go. But sometimes, the greatest act of love is knowing when to set someone free. Free to be themselves. Free to find their own peace. Free to live a life that is truly their own. Never, ever let the people who are supposed to love you make you feel small. True love will lift you up. It will give you wings. Lily looked up from the journal, her eyes shining with tears. She didn't have to say anything. We both understood. Eleanor's final gift wasn't a house, or money, or an escape plan. It was this moment, this understanding. I looked out at the horizon, where the setting sun was painting the sky in brilliant strokes of orange and purple. I had not won a war. I had not exacted revenge. I had simply chosen to live. I had honored my wife, not by clinging to the past we had built, but by embracing the future she had so lovingly prepared for me. The justice I had found was not in my children's defeat, but in my own quiet, profound, and unshakable peace. Here, with my granddaughter by my side and the sea breeze on my face, I was finally, truly, home.